Welcome to the Midnight Teller. Before we dive into tonight's stories, if you're enjoying this content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. My family used to go camping every summer when I was a kid. It was a tradition that started when I was about 6 and continued until I was in high school. We'd pack up the car with our tent, coolers, sleeping bags, and all the other gear, then drive a few hours to some state park or national forest and spend a long weekend in the woods. My parents loved it. They said it was a way to disconnect from the stress of everyday life, to unplug from technology and spend quality time together as a family without the distractions of work, school, and screens. Most of those trips are good memories. I remember roasting marshmallows over campfires until they were perfectly golden brown, hiking trails through dense forest, swimming in cold mountain lakes, and staying up late looking at stars, so bright you could see the Milky Way stretching across the sky. My dad would point out constellations, making up stories about them when he couldn't remember the real mythology. My mom would bring a guitar, sometimes, and we'd sing campfire songs, our voices echoing through the trees. But there's one trip I'll never forget, and not for good reasons. It's a trip that made us stop going camping altogether. It was the summer I turned 12. My younger sister Emma had just turned 9. We'd been camping dozens of times by then, so we were experienced enough to know what to expect. We decided to try a new campground that year, somewhere we'd never been before. It was called Pine Ridge Campground, tucked away in a national forest about 4 hours from where we lived in suburban Ohio. My dad had found it online while researching new places to explore. He'd shown us photos on the website. Tall pine trees, a clear creek running to the campground, well-maintained trails, and picnic tables at each site. But what really sold him on it was the reviews. People raved about how quiet and secluded it was, how you could spend days there without seeing another soul. For my dad, who worked 60-hour weeks as an accountant, that sounded like paradise. We left on a Friday morning in late July, right after my dad got off work. The drive took longer than expected because the last 20 miles or so were on increasingly narrow, winding roads that barely fit 2 cars. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to dirt, and the forest around us grew denser and darker as we climbed higher into the mountains. When we finally pulled into Pine Ridge Campground around 4 p.m., I understood immediately why it wasn't crowded. It felt remote. Really, truly remote. The kind of place where cell phone service was non-existent and the nearest town was an hour away. There was a small ranger station at the entrance, just a wooden building with a single window and a door. But no one was there. Just a wooden box mounted on the wall with a stack of campground maps and a faded sign that said self-registration. Choose any available site and deposit fee in envelope. My dad got out and grabbed a map as we drove slowly through the campground. I noticed something that made me uneasy. There were about 20 campsites total, each one separated by thick trees and underbrush for privacy. But every single one of them was empty. No tents, no RVs, no cars. Nothing. Just empty picnic tables and coal fire rings. Looks like we have the whole place to ourselves, my dad said, grinning. He seemed thrilled by the prospect. My mom smiled back at him, but I caught a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. Is it supposed to be this empty? Emma asked from the back seat, pressing her face against the window. It's the middle of summer on a Friday, my dad said. People are probably at work and will show up later tonight or tomorrow morning. We picked a site near the back of the campground, as far from the entrance as you could get. Site 17. It was a nice spot, I had to admit. Shaded by massive pine trees that must have been 100 years old, with a weathered picnic table and a stone fire ring that looked like it had been there for decades. About 30 feet away, we could hear the creek babbling over rocks, hidden by a screen of bushes and smaller trees. We spent the next hour and a half setting up camp. Our tent was one of those big family-sized ones that could sleep 6 people, though it was always a tight fit for 4 of us. My dad and I worked on getting it pitched while my mom and Emma unloaded the coolers and supplies from the car. By the time we finished, the sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. My younger sister kept complaining that it was too quiet. At first, I thought she was just being annoying, but the more I paid attention, the more I realized she was right. There were no sounds of other campers anywhere. No voices, no laughter, no music, no dogs barking, no kids playing. Just the wind in the trees, the creek in the background, and the occasional bird call. Even the birds seemed subdued, their songs half-hearted and infrequent. That's the point, my mom said, organizing our food supplies on the picnic table. We're here to enjoy nature, not listen to other people's radios. But it's weird, Emma insisted. Where's everyone? Maybe people don't know about this place yet. My dad offered, it's probably a hidden gem. We're lucky we found it. As evening approached, my dad built a fire in a ring and we cooked dinner. Hot dogs on sticks, baked beans heated in a pot over the flames, and chips. The usual camping fare. As darkness fell, we sat around the fire on camp chairs, talking about our plans for the weekend. My dad wanted to hike one of the longer trails in the morning. My mom wanted to spend time by the creek. Emma just wanted to see if there were any fish she could try to catch. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up into the darkening sky. Above us, stars were beginning to appear, and I had to admit it was beautiful. Maybe my dad was right. Maybe this place was just a well-kept secret. But then, just as full darkness settled over the campground, we heard something that changed everything. It came from the woods behind our campsite, somewhere deeper in the forest beyond the ring of light from our fire. At first, it was so faint I wasn't sure I was really hearing it. It sounded like someone humming or singing, but it wasn't a normal melody, nothing I recognized. It was low and repetitive, almost like a chant. The same few notes over and over, rising and falling in an unsettling rhythm. We all stopped talking at exactly the same moment, our heads turning toward the darkness behind the tent. The sound continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped abruptly, cut off mid-note. The silence that followed was even more unnerving than the sound had been. "What was that?" Emma whispered, moving her camp chair closer to my mom's. "Probably just another camper," my dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. He stood up and walked to the edge of our campsite, shining his flashlight into the woods. The beam of light barely penetrated the darkness, revealing only the nearest trees before being swallowed by the black. "I thought we were the only ones here," I said. "Maybe someone else arrived while we were cooking," my mom suggested, though she didn't sound like she believed it either. "The ranger station was closed when we got here. They could have come in after us." We tried to go back to our conversation, to recapture the relaxed mood we'd had before, but it was impossible. We were all listening now, our ears straining for any sound from the woods. The cheerful crackling of the fire seemed too loud, making it harder to hear anything else. Around 9 p.m., as the fire was dying down to glowing coals, my dad suggested we call a night. No one argued. We doused the fire with water from our jug, making sure every ember was dead and cold, then brushed our teeth using bottled water and spit into the bushes. The tent was set up with 2 sleeping bags on each side. I was next to Emma on the left, and my parents were on the right. My dad had brought a battery-powered lantern, which he hung from the center hook in the tent, casting a warm yellow glow over everything. It made me feel a little better, a little safer, even though logically I knew it wouldn't protect us from anything. "Everyone comfortable?" my dad asked, zipping the tent closed and securing the flap. "Yeah," I said, though my sleeping bag felt too thin, too vulnerable. "Can we leave the light on?" Emma asked. For a little while, my mom said, "But we need to conserve the battery. We might need it later." I must have eventually fallen asleep, because I woke up suddenly to Emma shaking my arm hard. The lantern was off now, and the tent was completely dark except for faint moonlight filtering through the fabric. "What?" I mumbled, disoriented. "Do you hear that?" she whispered urgently, her voice tight with fear. I listened, my brain slowly clearing. At first, I didn't hear anything unusual, just the normal sounds of camping, the wind in the trees, the creek in the distance. Then I heard it, footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps on the gravel that surrounded our campsite. But it wasn't a random pattern of someone walking past. These footsteps were circling, around and around our tent, the sound of boots on gravel crunching with each measured step. My heart began to pound, so hard I thought everyone would hear it. I reached across the narrow space between sleeping bags and shook my dad's shoulder. "Dad," I hissed. "Dad, wake up. Someone's outside." He sat up immediately, instantly alert. My mom stirred beside him. We all sat there in the darkness, frozen, listening to the footsteps complete another circle around our tent. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Methodical, unhurried, like whoever was at all the time in the world. The footsteps stopped, right next to where Emma and I were lying, so close I could have reached out and touched the tent wall, and touched whoever was on the other side. "Stay here," my dad whispered. "Don't make a sound." He unzipped the sleeping bag as quietly as possible, then carefully opened the tent zipper. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the silence. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside, and I heard his footsteps moving around the tent, heard the flashlight clicking on. "Hello," he called out. "Is someone there?" No answer, just silence. He was outside for maybe a full minute, walking around the campsite, shining his light in different directions. When he came back inside, his face was pale in the moonlight. "There's no one out there," he said, but his hands were shaking as he zipped the tent closed again. "That wasn't an animal," I said. "Animals don't walk like that." "I know," he admitted quietly, "but there's no one there." I checked everywhere. "Maybe they ran when they heard you coming out," my mom suggested. "Maybe," my dad said, but he didn't sound convinced. None of us went back to sleep. We just lay there in our sleeping bags, staring at the ceiling of the tent, listening. About 20 minutes later, the footsteps came back, but this time, they didn't just circle the tent. They stopped right next to us, and we heard something that made my blood run cold. Breathing. Low, steady breathing, just on the other side of the thin fabric wall. So close that if the tent hadn't been there, we'd be face to face with whoever it was. The breathing continued for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then suddenly it stopped, and we heard footsteps again, but this time they weren't walking. They were running. Fast, heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush, moving away from our campsite, deeper into the forest. "That's it," my dad said, his voice shaking. "We're leaving, right now. Pack everything up." We didn't argue. We didn't ask questions. We just moved. My dad turned on the lantern, and we scrambled out of our sleeping bags. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely roll up my sleeping bag. My mom and Emma were stuffing things into bags without any organization, just throwing everything together. My dad went outside and started collapsing the tent while we were still gathering our things inside it. We worked in near silence. The only sounds are rapid breathing and the rustling of gear being packed. I kept glancing toward the dark tree line, expecting to see someone standing there, watching us. But I saw nothing except darkness and the wavering shadows cast by my dad's flashlight. It took us maybe 25 minutes to pack everything, though it felt both longer and shorter than that. Time seemed to distort, every second stretching out while simultaneously racing by. We threw everything into the car, without bothering to organize it properly. Coolers, sleeping bags, tent chairs, everything just tossed in the trunk and back seat in a chaotic pile. As soon as the last item was in the car, we jumped in and my dad started the engine. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet of the forest. He turned on the headlights, and for just a second, I thought I saw something at the edge of the light. A shape, tall and thin, standing between two trees. But then my dad put the car in gear and we were moving, driving too fast over the rough campground road, bouncing over potholes and rocks. None of us looked back. We drove in complete silence through the dark forest, my dad's hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. It felt like it took forever to reach the main road, though it was probably only 15 minutes. Every time we went around a curve, I half expected to see someone standing in the road, blocking our way, but we made it. We reached the highway, and my dad finally seemed to relax slightly, his shoulders dropping, his grip on the wheel loosening just a fraction. "What did you see?" my mom asked quietly, "when you went outside the first time?" My dad was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. When I went out the second time, after we heard the breathing, I saw footprints in the dirt, right next to the tent. Boot prints. Size looked like a man's, maybe size 11 or 12. But that's not what scared me. What was it? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. They just appeared there. When I went out the first time, there was nothing, just smooth dirt. But the second time, there they were. Like whoever it was had been standing there the whole time, but I couldn't see them. We drove straight through the night, not stopping until we reached a 24-hour diner about 2 hours from home. We sat in a bright booth under fluorescent lights, drinking coffee and hot chocolate. None of us wanted to talk about what had happened, but none of us able to think about anything else. We never went camping again after that, not as a family. My parents sold all our camping gear at a yard sale the next summer. And we never talked about that night, not really. It was like an unspoken agreement that if we didn't discuss it, we could pretend it didn't happen. But I think about it sometimes. Usually late at night, when I'm trying to fall asleep. I think about those footsteps circling our tent, about the breathing on the other side of the fabric, about my dad's pale face when he came back inside. And I think about the footprints that appeared in the dirt, the footprints that weren't there until they were. I don't know who or what was out there in those woods, but I know that Pine Ridge Campground is still out there, still marked on maps, still available for camping. And I know that somewhere right now, there might be another family setting up their tent at Site 17, excited for a quiet weekend in nature. And I wonder if they'll hear the footsteps too. I've always enjoyed camping alone. I know that sounds strange to a lot of people. Most folks think camping is a social activity, something you do with friends or family. But for me, there's something deeply peaceful about being out in the woods by yourself, with nothing but your own thoughts and the sounds of nature for company. I started solo camping about 7 years ago, after a particularly stressful period at work. I'm a software engineer, and I've been working 90-hour weeks for months on a project that was falling apart despite everyone's best efforts. I was burned out, exhausted, barely sleeping. A friend suggested I take a weekend and just get away from everything. No phone, no internet, no people. Just me and the wilderness. That first trip changed my life. There's something almost meditative about the simplicity of solo camping. Setting up your tent becomes a ritual. Cooking a meal on a camp stove becomes an event. Watching the sun set without checking your phone every 5 minutes becomes a revelation. I came back from that weekend feeling more relaxed and clear-headed than I had in years. After that, I started going at least once a month, sometimes more. I got good at it. Learned what gear I really needed versus what was just extra weight. Figure out how to stay safe, how to choose good campsites, how to read weather patterns. I usually picked established campgrounds with other people around, not because I was afraid, but just as a practical safety measure. If something went wrong, if I twisted an ankle or got sick, there'd be someone nearby who could help. But after doing this for 5 years, I started craving something more. Something beyond the established campgrounds with their neat fire rings and designated tent pads and families in RVs. I wanted real solitude, true wilderness. The kind of camping our ancestors did, where you just find a spot that looks good and make camp there. So I started researching dispersed camping areas. These are sections of national forests where you're allowed to camp anywhere you want, with no facilities, no amenities, nothing, just you and the forest. I found one that looked perfect, about 3 hours north of where I lived. The national forest was huge, over 2 million acres, with hundreds of miles of Forest Service roads where you could drive in and find your own spot. I planned the trip for a Thursday through Sunday in early September. The summer crowds would be gone. The weather would still be warm but not hot, and I'd have a full 4 days to truly disconnect. I told my roommate where I was going, and when I'd be back, showed him on a map the general area I'd be in, and made him promise to call the Forest Service if I wasn't home by Monday evening. I left early Thursday morning, my truck packed with gear, tent, sleeping bag, camp stove, food for 4 days, water filtration system, first aid kit, knife, hatchet, and my bare canister for food storage. I'd done this enough times that packing was second nature. I knew exactly what I needed and what I could leave behind. The drive was beautiful. Late summer in the mountains, with the first hints of fall colors starting to show in the aspens. I left the highway after about 2 hours and turned onto a Forest Service road that was barely more than 2 tire tracks through the trees. The truck bounced and jostled over rocks and through potholes, but I'd driven worse roads before. I drove for about 90 minutes, going deeper and deeper into the forest, the trees getting denser, the road getting rougher. I passed a few spots that might have worked for camping, but I wanted to go farther, to get really remote. Finally, around noon, I found it. A small clearing next to a creek, maybe 30 feet across, surrounded by dense pine and aspen trees. The creek was clear and cold, probably fed by snowmelt from higher elevations. The clearing had obviously been used as a campsite before. There was a makeshift fire ring made of rocks, and the ground was fairly level. Perfect. I parked my truck at the edge of the clearing and spent the next hour setting up camp. My tent was a lightweight backpacking model, easy to pitch. I arranged my sleeping bag and pad inside, stored my food in the bare canister, and hung it from a tree about 100 feet away from my tent, and set my camp stove on a flat rock near the fire ring. After everything was ready, I spent the afternoon exploring. I walked along the creek for about a mile in each direction, taking photos, listening to the water, feeling the stress of the past months melting away with each step. This was exactly what I needed. I made it back to camp around 5 p.m. and decided to cook an early dinner. Just some freeze-dried camping food, beef stroganoff from a packet. It wasn't gourmet, but out here, eating while watching the sun filter through the trees, it tasted perfect. As I was eating, something caught my eye across the creek. Another tent. I hadn't noticed it before because it was partially hidden by trees, and the angle had been wrong from where I'd been. It was maybe 50 or 60 yards away on the opposite bank, a dark green tent that blended well with the surrounding forest. I felt a mix of emotions. Disappointment mostly. I'd come all this way for solitude, and here was someone else. But also a small sense of relief. Another person meant I wasn't completely alone out here. And honestly, the forest was big enough that we could easily avoid each other if we both wanted privacy. I watched the other tent for a few minutes while I finished eating, but I didn't see any movement over there. No one coming in or out, no light inside the tent, no sound of someone moving around their campsite. Maybe they were out hiking and would come back before dark. As the sun started to set, I built a small fire in the rock ring. I wasn't trying to get warm. The evening was pleasant. I just wanted the light and the crackling sound. There's something primal and comforting about sitting next to a fire, something that reaches back to when our ancestors huddled around flames for safety. I pulled out my book and read by headlamp until about 9 p.m. The sky above the clearing was starting to fill with stars, more than you could ever see in the city. The Milky Way was a river of light overhead. I took some long exposure photos with my phone, knowing they wouldn't capture how it really looked, but wanted to try anyway. By 10 p.m., I was ready for sleep. I put out my fire carefully, making absolutely sure no embers remained. Then I brushed my teeth, changed into my sleeping clothes, and climbed into my tent. I was just starting to drift off when I heard it. A voice, faint but distinct, coming from across the creek where the other tent was. It sounded like someone talking, maybe on a phone call or talking to themselves. I couldn't make out any words, just a tone and rhythm of speech. It continued for a few minutes, then stopped. I lay there in the darkness, thinking it was odd to be on a phone call out here. I checked my phone when I arrived, and there was no service at all. But maybe they had a satellite phone, or maybe they were just talking to themselves, which plenty of solo campers did. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but the voice came back. And this time, something about it made my skin crawl. The tone was wrong. It wasn't the normal rhythm of human speech. It was too steady, too repetitive, almost like chanting, and it would rise and fall and pitch in ways that didn't sound natural. I sat up in my sleeping bag and unzipped my tent a few inches so I could see out. The other tent was just a dark shape in the moonlight. No light inside, No movement I could detect. But the voice continued, coming from that direction. "Hello?" I called out, loud enough to carry across the creek. "Is everything okay over there?" The voice stopped immediately. The sudden silence was almost more unnerving than the voice had been. And it wasn't just the voice that stopped. Everything stopped. The creek seemed to go quiet. The wind died. Even the insects stopped their chirping. It was like someone had pressed a mute button on the entire forest. I waited, barely breathing, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence stretched on for what felt like minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then, slowly, the sound of the forest started coming back. The creek resumed its burbling. A breeze rustled the leaves. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance, but the voice didn't return. I zipped my tent back up and lay there in the darkness, every sense on high alert. Sleep was impossible now. I just lay there, listening, waiting. Hours passed. I checked my watch with my headlamp. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., still nothing. No sound from the other tent. Just the normal sound of forest at night. Maybe I'd imagined how strange the voice sounded. Maybe it had been completely normal, and my isolation had made me paranoid. Maybe whoever had just been practicing some meditation chant or listening to something on headphones. By 3 a.m., I started to relax a little. My eyelids were getting heavy. The adrenaline was wearing off. I finally allowed myself to drift towards sleep. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were on my side of the creek now. Slow, quiet footsteps moving through the forest near my campsite. I held my breath, listening intently. The steps moved closer, then stopped, right outside my tent. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just lay there, frozen, staring at the tent wall. A shadow appeared on the tent fabric, backlit by the moon. The silhouette of a person standing just inches away from me, with only the thin nylon of the tent between us. The shadow didn't move, just stood there for what felt like an eternity. I could hear breathing now, slow and steady, from whoever was standing there. I don't know how long it lasted. Maybe a minute, maybe 5. Time stopped having meaning. All I could do was lie there, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they could hear it. Then, finally, the shadow moved. The footsteps resumed, walking away from my tent, circling around my campsite. I tracked the sound as it moved around me in a wide circle. Once, twice, 3 times. Then the footsteps headed back toward the creek. I heard them splash through the water, then grow fainter as they moved away, back toward where the other tent was. I stayed in my sleeping bag, too terrified to move, until the skies started to lighten with dawn. Only then did I finally unzip my tent and look outside. My campsite looked normal. Fire ring, camp stove, my truck. Everything exactly as I'd left it. I walked slowly around the perimeter of my camp, looking for footprints or any sign of someone having been there. I found them near my tent. Boot prints in the soft dirt. They led from the direction of the creek. Circled my tent several times, then headed back toward the water. I looked across the creek. The other tent was gone. Not just empty. Gone. No sign it had ever been there. Just undisturbed forest. I didn't even bother breaking down my camp properly. I just threw everything in my truck as fast as I could and got out of there. I drove for 2 hours straight, not stopping until I was back on the highway and could see other cars and houses and signs of civilization. I still go camping, but never alone anymore, and never, ever in dispersed camping areas. I stick to established campgrounds now, places with rangers and other people and lights, because I know now that when you go deep enough into the wilderness, far enough from other people, you're not always alone. Sometimes there's someone or something else out there, watching, waiting, following, and I never want to meet them again. College is a time for bonding with friends, trying new things, and occasionally making questionable decisions. Spring break of my junior year fell into that last category. My roommate Jake had this brilliant idea. Instead of going to some overcrowded beach like everyone else, why didn't we go camping? It would be cheaper, more adventurous, and we'd actually remember it unlike the blur of parties and hangovers that most spring breaks turn into. He managed to convince 4 of us to go along with it. There was Jake, obviously, then Sarah, who was dating Jake at the time and was always up for outdoor stuff, Marcus, who was Jake's best friend since high school and who I knew from playing intramural basketball, and me, Tyler. I'd gone camping a few times with my family when I was younger, but it had been years. We planned to go to a state park about 4 hours away that was known for good hiking and primitive camping. We'd rent a campsite for 3 nights, Wednesday through Saturday. Jake and Sarah would bring their tent, Marcus and I would share another tent, and we'd split the cost of food and supplies. Looking back, we were woefully unprepared. None of us had camped without our parents before. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we were 20 years old and invincible, so we figured we'd figure it out. We left early Wednesday morning, Jake's SUV packed with our tents, sleeping bags, and coolers of food. The drive was great. We listened to music, joked around, stopped for fast food breakfast. We were excited, ready for an adventure. We arrived at the park around noon. The ranger station was open, and a friendly older guy with a thick beard checked us in and gave us a map. Our campsite was in the primitive area, meaning no electricity or water hookups. Just a spot in the woods with a fire ring and a picnic table. We had to park in a small lot and hike about half a mile in with our gear. It took us 3 trips to haul everything from the car to the campsite, and by the time we were done, we were all sweating and complaining. But when we finally saw our site, we had to admit it was pretty nice. It was in a clearing surrounded by oak trees, with a decent fire ring and a weathered but sturdy picnic table. Through the trees, we could see the other primitive campsites, probably 6 or 7 others in the area. Most of them looked empty, but we could see one group setting up camp a few sites over, a family with 2 little kids. By the looks of it, that was reassuring. We weren't completely alone out here. Setting up the tents was an adventure in itself. Jake and Sarah's tent was a newer 2-person model that went up easily. The tent Marcus and I were sharing was an old 4-person tent that Marcus's dad had lent us, and it took us almost an hour to figure out which poles went where and how everything connected. By the time we finally had it standing, Marcus and I were both frustrated and arguing about whose fault was that we'd gotten confused. But once camp was set up, things got better. We spent the afternoon exploring, finding the nearest trail and hiking a few miles through the woods. It was actually really nice. The stress of classes and exams felt far away. We weren't checking our phones every 5 minutes because there was barely any signal. We were just 4 friends hanging out in nature. We made it back to camp around 5 p.m. and started working on dinner. Our cooking situation was pretty basic. We brought hot dogs, hamburgers, buns, chips, and More supplies. Jake got a fire going in the ring, while Sarah organized our food supplies. Marcus and I went to fill our water bottles from the spigot near the parking area. As we were walking back, we passed another campsite that we hadn't noticed before. It was tucked back in the trees, almost hidden from the main area. There was a tent there, but it wasn't like any camping tent I'd ever seen. It was huge, more like a canvas wall tent that hunters use, with straight sides and a peaked roof. Old looking with stains and patches. Weird tent, Marcus commented. Yeah, I agreed. There was something about it that made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't say exactly what. We didn't see anyone around it. No people, no chairs, no cooler, nothing. Just a tent and a fire ring that looked like it hadn't been used recently. We got back to our site and told Jake and Sarah about it. Probably just someone who likes vintage gear, Sarah said. She was into hiking and camping and knew a lot more about it than the rest of us. Some people are really into that old school camping aesthetic. That made sense. So we dropped it and focused on cooking dinner. The evening was perfect. We sat around the fire as it got dark, eating hot dogs and chips, telling stories, laughing. This had been a great idea after all. Around 9 p.m., we started hearing sounds from the other occupied campsites. The family with kids was clearly getting their children ready for bed. We could hear a woman's voice singing a lullaby. From another direction, we heard a group of what sounded like older people laughing and talking around their fire. It was comforting, knowing we weren't alone out here. We stayed up until maybe 11 p.m., then decided to call a night. Jake and Sarah said goodnight and disappeared into their tent. Marcus and I brushed our teeth and climbed into ours. The tent was cramped with both of us in there, and Marcus's feet smelled terrible, but I was exhausted from the day of hiking and setting up camp. I fell asleep almost immediately. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still fully dark. Marcus was snoring beside me. I needed a pee, which was probably what had woken me. I debated just holding it until morning, but I knew I wouldn't be able to fall back asleep if I didn't go. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could, trying not to wake Marcus, and crawled out into the cool night air. I stood up, stretching, and grabbed my flashlight from next to the tent. The campground was quiet. The fire in our ring had burned down to barely glowing embers. I could hear the wind in the trees and some animal rustling around in the distance, probably a raccoon looking for food. I walked about 30 feet from our campsite to a spot behind some trees where I'd have some privacy, and took care of business. As I was finishing up, I heard something that made me pause. Singing, faint but clear. Someone was singing, but it wasn't like the lullaby we'd heard earlier. This was different, lower pitched, almost a chant, and the melody was strange, unlike anything I'd heard before. I zipped up and walked back toward my tent, but the singing continued. It seemed to be coming from deeper in the campground, from the direction of that weird canvas tent we'd seen earlier. I stood there listening. The singing went on for maybe a full minute, then stopped abruptly. Everything went silent again. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone doing some kind of meditation or prayer before bed. People were weird. It was fine. I climbed back into the tent and tried to go to sleep, but now I was wide awake, my mind turning over that strange singing. The melody kept replaying in my head, even though I couldn't remember the exact notes now. I must have eventually dozed off, because the next thing I knew, Marcus was shaking my shoulder. "Dude, wake up." "What?" I mumbled, disoriented. "Do you hear that?" I listened. At first, I didn't hear anything. Then I did. Footsteps. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving through the campground. They weren't trying to be quiet. I could hear branches breaking, leaves rustling, and what sounded like whispering voices. "What time is it?" I asked. Marcus checked his watch. 3:30. We both lay there listening. The footsteps seemed to be moving between the campsites, getting closer to ours. "Should we check it out?" Marcus whispered. "No," I said immediately. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stay in the tent, to not draw attention to ourselves. The footsteps came closer. I heard them pass by our campsite, maybe 20 feet away. Through the thin fabric of the tent, I could see shadows moving in the moonlight. At least 3 people, maybe more. They passed by without stopping and continued toward where Jake and Sarah's tent was. I held my breath, terrified they were going to do something to our friends. But they kept walking, moving past Jake's tent too, heading farther into the campground. After a minute, the sounds faded completely. Marcus and I didn't say anything. We just lay there in the darkness, too scared to move. What the hell was that? Marcus finally whispered, "I don't know. Should we check on Jake and Sarah?" "In the morning," I said. "Let's just stay here." Neither of us slept after that. We just lay there waiting for dawn, every small sound making us jump. When the sun finally started to rise, we crawled out of our tent. Everything looked normal. Our campsite was undisturbed. I walked over to Jake's tent and called out softly, "Jake? Sarah? You guys awake?" I heard movement inside. Then Jake unzipped the tent and stuck his head out, looking groggy. "What's up? Did you guys hear anything last night?" "Like what?" "People walking around. Voices." He frowned. "No, we were dead asleep." "Why?" Marcus and I explained what we'd heard. Jake listened, looking more concerned with each detail. "That's weird," he said. "Let me get Sarah up and we'll walk around, see if anyone else heard anything." The 4 of us walked through the primitive camping area, visiting the other occupied sites. The family with kids was already up making breakfast. We asked if they'd heard anything strange during the night. "Now that you mention it," the dad said, I did hear some voices around 3 or 4 in the morning. Thought it was weird that people were up that late, but I figured it was just other campers. We thanked them and continued on. When we got to the area where the canvas tent had been, we stopped. The tent was gone. Not just taken down, but gone completely. The site looked like no one had been there at all. The grass wasn't even flattened where the tent had been. That's where we saw that weird tent yesterday. I said to Jake and Sarah, "Are you sure?" Sarah asked, "Positive." We searched the area but found nothing. No tent, no gear, no sign anyone had camped there. Maybe they left really early this morning, Jake suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. We reported what happened to the ranger station when we packed up to leave the next day. The ranger listened politely, but didn't seem too concerned. "We get all kinds of people coming through here," he said. "Some of them are a little odd, but as long as they're not causing trouble, we let them be. But don't you think it's weird that we heard people walking around at 3 in the morning?" He shrugged. "Could have been park rangers doing patrol. Or maybe some folks got lost coming back from a bathroom. I wouldn't worry about it too much." We left it at that, but none of us felt satisfied with his explanation. And when we got back to school and told other people about our trip, everyone had the same reaction. "Why didn't you just leave when you heard the weird stuff?" Honestly, I don't know. At the time, leaving felt like an overreaction. It was just singing and footsteps. Nothing threatening. Nothing dangerous. But looking back now, I think we should have trusted our instincts. Because whatever was happening in that campground that night, it wasn't normal. And I'm glad we only had to spend one night finding that out. My girlfriend at the time, Emma, and I had been planning a camping trip for months. We'd been dating for about a year, and we wanted to do something special to celebrate our anniversary, instead of going out to some expensive restaurant. We decided we'd rather spend the money on a camping trip, just the two of us, somewhere beautiful and remote. We chose a spot in the mountains about 3 hours from where we lived. The campground was near a lake, with great reviews online. People raved about the scenery, the hiking trails, and how peaceful it was. It seemed perfect. We left on a Friday afternoon in late May, right after Emma got off work. I'd taken a half day, so I could pack everything up. We had a good tent, a double sleeping bag meant for couples, a camp stove, plenty of food, and all the other gear we'd need. We checked the weather forecast obsessively. It was supposed to be clear all weekend, highs in the low 70s, perfect camping weather. The drive up was great. We sang along to music, talked about all the hikes we wanted to do, planned out our meals. Emma was a much better cook than me, even on a camp stove, and she planned this elaborate meal for Saturday night. Pan-seared fish, rice, vegetables. I was in charge of breakfast, which meant I was making eggs and bacon, the only things I could reliably cook. We arrived at the campground around 7 p.m. The sun was getting low, but there was still plenty of light. The campground was busier than we'd expected. Most of the sites were occupied, with tents and RVs and families getting ready for the evening. We found our reserve site, number 42, tucked back against the tree line. It was a good spot, with some privacy from the neighboring sites and a nice view of the lake through the trees. We spent the next hour setting up camp. Our tent was one of those easy pop-up models that basically set itself up, which was good because neither of us was particularly experienced with camping. We got it situated on a flat spot, arranged our gear inside, and set up our little camp kitchen area with the stove and our cooler. By the time we finished, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. We walked down to the lake and sat on the shore, watching the light fade and the stars begin to appear. It was exactly what we'd been hoping for. Peaceful, romantic, beautiful. We stayed by the lake until it was fully dark, then walked back to our campsite. I built a small fire, which took way more tries than I wanted to admit, while Emma made us sandwiches for dinner. We sat around the fire, talking and laughing, completely content. Around 11 p.m., we decided to go to bed. We had a big hike planned for the morning, and we wanted to get an early start. We put out the fire, made sure all our food was secure in the bear box at our site, and climbed into the tent. The double sleeping bag was perfect for cuddling, and we fell asleep quickly, wrapped in each other's arms. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up, but it was still fully dark outside. Something had woken me, but I wasn't sure what. I lay there, listening, trying to figure out what had disturbed my sleep. Then I heard it. Rain. It was raining. Not just a light drizzle, but a heavy, steady rain that was drumming on the tent. "Emma," I whispered, "wake up." She stirred beside me. "It's raining." "So," she mumbled, still half asleep. "The forecast said it wasn't supposed to rain. Weather forecasts are wrong sometimes. Go back to sleep." I tried, but something fell off. I couldn't put my finger on what exactly, but something about the rain didn't feel right. I lay there listening. The rain continued, a steady drumming on the tent fabric. But now that I was fully awake, I realized what was bothering me. I could only hear the rain hitting our tent, not the ground around us, not the trees, not any of the other tents in the campground, just our tent. I sat up, careful not to disturb Emma, who had fallen back asleep. I reached for my flashlight and turned it on, shining it at the tent walls. The fabric was moving, rippling with the impacts of the raindrops. I could see water running down in small rivulets. But when I shone the light at the bottom of the tent, where it met the ground, I didn't see any water pooling. The ground inside looked completely dry. That didn't make sense. If it was raining this hard, there should be water everywhere. I carefully unzipped the tent a few inches and looked outside. The night was perfectly clear. Stars visible overhead. The ground was dry. The trees weren't moving. There was no wind. And most importantly, there was no rain. Not a drop, but I could still hear it. That steady drumming on the tent right above my head. My heart started beating faster. I zipped the tent back up and sat there in the darkness, listening to the rain that wasn't rain. "Emma," I said, louder this time. "Emma, wake up." "What?" She sounded annoyed now. Listen to the rain. "What about it?" "It's not raining outside." That woke her up. She sat up beside me, and I could feel her tense as she listened to the sound. "What do you mean it's not raining?" I looked outside. It's completely dry. Clear sky. No rain. That's impossible. "I know." We sat there together, listening to the drumming that had no source. It continued for several minutes, never changing in intensity, never letting up. Just a steady, unnatural rhythm. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Complete silence. Not even the normal sounds of the forest at night. No insects, no rustling leaves, no distant sounds from other campsites. Just absolute, oppressive silence. "Tyler," Emma whispered, and I could hear the fear in her voice. "I want to leave. It's the middle of the night. We can't drive these mountain roads in the dark." "I don't care. I want to leave right now." I was about to argue, to try to calm her down, when we heard something else. Footsteps, circling our tent. Slow, measured footsteps, crunching on the forest floor. Emma grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. The footsteps completed one full circle around our tent, then stopped. Right at the entrance, where the zipper was, we heard breathing. Right outside. So close. Then a voice. Low, barely above a whisper, but clear enough to understand. "Let me in," Emma screamed. Not loud, but a sharp, frightened sound. I clamped my hand over her mouth, terrified that whoever was outside would take that as an invitation. The breathing continued for another few seconds. Then the footsteps resumed, moving away from our tent, fading into the distance. We didn't wait another second. We threw on our shoes, grabbed our car keys and wallets, and abandoned everything else. We didn't take down the tent, didn't pack our gear, didn't close up the cooler. We just ran. We ran through the dark campground, past other tents where people were sleeping peacefully, past the darkened bathrooms and the empty fire rings. We ran until we reached our car in the parking area, threw ourselves inside, locked the doors, and drove. We drove straight through the night, not stopping until we reached a 24-hour diner about an hour from home. We sat in a bright booth, drinking coffee, Neither of us wanted to talk about what had happened, but neither of us able to think about anything else. "What was that?" Emma finally asked, her voice small. "I don't know." "The rain that wasn't rain." "The voice." "Tyler, what was that?" "I don't know," I repeated, because I didn't. I had no explanation that made sense. We never went back for our gear. I called the campground the next day and told them we'd had to leave suddenly due to an emergency, and they could have or dispose of everything we left behind. I didn't care. I just wanted nothing more to do with that place. Emma and I broke up a few months later. We told ourselves it was just natural drifting apart, that we were heading in different directions. But I think the camping trip had something to do with it too. Every time we looked at each other, we were reminded of that night, of the fear, of the thing outside our tent that whispered, "Let me in." I still go camping occasionally, but never to that place, and never without thoroughly researching the area first. Because I learned that night that not all campgrounds are safe. Some places, some spots in the woods, have something wrong with them. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, you'll pick one of those places to spend the night. I just hope you hear the warning signs before it's too late.